So, hi everybody, Chris Pies here again for another classroom session with the PCA Sim Racing series. We are going into race 2 of the 5 race little mini series we've got here in the summer called the Summer Series. The first race is at Lime Rock and the Grand Prix, or not the Grand Prix, the Classics configuration. And now we're going over to a track that is near and dear to my heart that I have spent a lot of time at both in real life and also in sim, which is VIR, Virginia International Raceway. So we're going to the woods of Virginia, and we're going to drive on, in my opinion, one of the best tracks in North America. It's just got a lot of history. There's nothing quite like it out there. And it will definitely show flaws in driving style, and it will reward those that are smooth and are able to carry momentum throughout a lap. So loading up here real quick the lap I did earlier. So give me 1 second. Replays. All right, VIR. So like last week, we're going to be running in, if you're in Class C, you're going to be running the GT3R with open setups. If you are in Class A or B, I think you have the option to also run the GT4 if you want, but my understanding is it wasn't the most popular choice at Lime Rock. So we'll be doing the track walk in the GT3R. Big thing about here is, as I was talking just before we went live, was about setup and about what setup can do. And all setup is doing is enabling you as the driver to be more comfortable behind the wheel of the car. And that comfort level, if you are comfortable with the way the car handles, then you're more apt to lean on it and get to its limits, and get closer to the limits than if you're with a setup that's not agreeing with your driving style. Setup isn't all of a sudden going to be something that is going to increase your speed exponentially just because somebody has a VRS setup or somebody has a Majors Garage setup or something. There's no secret bullet in most cases, but it's whatever you're most comfortable with will enable you to drive the quickest. So with that being said, let's get started here with VIR. Let me get a good angle here. So a couple of things about VIR in terms of what the goal is or thoughts about this track. So VIR has a lot of high-speed corners, with the most important corner actually being the slowest corner on the track, and that's Oak Tree. The goal or the kind of swing thought that we want to have at VIR is we want to maintain our momentum. We don't want to overslow the car. And that's consistent amongst pretty much every track you drive, but really so at VIR. There's a lot of situations at VIR where it's very inviting to overslow the car. What I mean by that is overbrake it, slow the car down too much for a particular corner. And every mile an hour below the min speed that you should be at a corner that you overslow is another mile an hour that you have to gain in acceleration that somebody else may not have. So think of braking zones and corner entry as not just not just a situation where you have to slow the car down to make the corner, but also as an opportunity to carry a little bit more speed on the entry so you don't have to accelerate as much coming out of the corner. Of course, we want to do the adage of slow in, fast out, meaning we get on the throttle as quickly as we can to get good runs coming out of corners. But at the same time, we don't want to stop the car on entry just so we can get on throttle super early, because there becomes a diminishing return and in fact a situation where that actually starts to slow lap time down. So the laps that I did earlier today, very cold track. I just grabbed whatever setting was from last time I ran. So a 65-degree track, I mean, it's pretty much as optimal as it gets. And I was running my custom setup that I had because I had run this track a few weeks earlier in the official sessions in the VRS series. And the lap that we're looking at is this 1:44.5. I'm sure there's faster laps out there, and you could probably see them, but this felt like a good repeatable lap time over and over. As you can kind of see, the next lap I did was a 44.6, so within a tenth. So anyway, let's jump right into it and take a look and see what the lap looks like. So coming down the front straight at VIR, the big thing to remember about the front straight is it's not straight. It's actually curved. And like any curve, we want to make sure that we are apexing it properly. Even though we're going to be 100% full throttle and we could put the car wherever we want on track, we still need to make sure that we're apexing it appropriately, meaning that right at around this curbing right here on the right, where start finishes, we want to probably be on the inside of the track and apexing at that point. This does a couple of things. One, if we're not apexing appropriately, we could be potentially adding in too much steering on going down the straightaway. So if we don't apex here, if our car is over here, we'll steer more at a later point. And what that's doing is the more our tires are angled in a steering motion through a straightaway, the more scrub or the more friction is fighting our acceleration. So we're inducing friction, and we're inducing effectively drag on the car. And it's not going to be able to accelerate as efficiently as possible. So by keeping our wheels as straight as possible on straightaways, even ones that have curves, we are increasing the rate of acceleration of the car all the way down the straightaway. It may not be a lot, or it may not seem like a lot for sure, but a mile an hour or 2 miles an hour, I mean, it can account for half a tenth or maybe even a tenth if you're doing it poorly down the straightaway. And who wouldn't love to get a tenth on a straight? So we try to keep our tires as straight as possible throughout the straightaway, so we can maximize our rate of acceleration all the way down. Coming into turn 1, we've got these nice brake markers, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all the way into turn 1. Turn 1 is kind of a decreasing radius corner. It just never seems to end, and we need to be patient with it. So we'll turn in, we'll kind of, like I said before, we will roll our speed and roll our momentum into the beginning of this corner, but we're going to delay our throttle for what feels like an eternity, because we want the car to keep rotating through the mid part of the corner, because as this corner progresses, it gets tighter and tighter, and then it starts to open up towards the end. So what we need to do is we need to get a really good initial turn in, and then as the car starts to rotate, it almost feels like it's over rotating or returning too much in this corner. And we're doing that because the corner never seems to finish. And then when we get back on throttle, we're going to get back on full throttle as quickly as we can, and we're going to hold it there when we do go on full throttle. So, but for the brake zone, I like the 3 board is a really good indicator. You'll also notice, if you can see in the camera, there is actually a little bit of a downhill, or less. I don't think it's actually downhill. I think it's actually it flattens out a bit right here around just after the 3 board, and between the 3 and the 1 board, the track is actually flatter, and then it goes back uphill a little bit into turn 1. So if you brake at the 3 board, you may find yourself getting a really good brake response from your brakes and a really good deceleration at or before the 3 board. But if you go to maybe 3.5 or 2.5, you'll notice that it's like, my goodness, the car doesn't brake nearly as much. And the reason is because gravity is not helping us, or the traction and the grip of the car is not helping us, because we're not going uphill anymore. We're flattened out. So this little ridge that's right here can really help us brake if we brake before the 3 board. We can also brake after it, just understanding that we're not going to have as much of that initial bite until probably around after the 2 board, when the track starts to come back to us. So for me, in these conditions, I was actually braking at about the 3.5, I believe. So right here is where I'm braking. So pretty much right at 3.5. If it is hotter and there's less traction, I will be braking probably at the 3, and maybe rolling a softer pedal in, not totally threshold braking. This is a threshold braking zone, so we're going to try to get all the way and do a 10 pedal on the brake. And what that means is, I mean, it's full emergency stop. We're trying to get this car to stop. The GT3R has the benefit of traction control and ABS, more importantly. So if there's 2 ways you can brake this car. You can go into ABS to maximize your brake and the feeling of the brake going through, to maximize your deceleration. Or you can treat it like a cup car and brake basically at threshold and try not to get into the ABS. There's been an update in these cars where ABS is much more like real life, where you can use it pretty reliably and get a really consistent result. Or you don't have to be at threshold without getting into ABS and still get the car to perform. The big takeaway, though, is that you don't want to be turning the steering wheel at all, or much at all, if you're in ABS. You're not going to get any response from the front wheels if you're in ABS. So this is threshold braking, creeping into the ABS at this point, keeping the car as straight as possible before entry. And then we're going to turn in really what feels like it feels like when you're driving into this corner, it feels like you're turning in early. But I'm turning in after the boards in this kind of dead zone. My eyes over here are looking at the curbing. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get this car braked and still braking, pretty aggressive trail brake into this corner, and get the car down to the apex or to the curbing and ride that curbing all the way around, almost like a mini carousel. So I've turned in here. You can still see I have a pretty significant brake. I'm still braking. I've got a ton of turning. You can actually see my steering wheel down in the bottom. I've almost got 90 degrees of steering angle into the car. And at this point, I'm still using brake. I'm still doing everything I can to keep some weight on the front tires to keep getting that front end to bite. And this is what I mean about the curbing. This candy stripe curbing that's right here, I'm trying to get all the way down to it to the point where it starts, bring it all the way down, get as close as I can to it. And in fact, you can get up on it. On this particular lap, I kind of missed it a bit, but you can get all the way up on it and try to keep the car as tight as I can. When I'm normally driving in a race situation, I'm trying to get my right side tires to be right here, where the grass starts back up after the candy stripe curbing, and that'd be my exit point. On this particular lap, I was really trying to cook it, and I kind of started running a little bit wide, and I had to delay my accelerator because of it. But in general, my goal is to do the apex somewhere around this area. I'm a little bit late here, but you can see with the GT3R, with the weight being over the back axle, we can really get that engine and that weight back there to kind of pendulum the car around and get that mid-corner rotation. And then when we get on throttle, always it feels like we get a little bit more rotation. So we have that rotation mid-corner as we're getting off the brake because we have all the weight back there. And then as we get on the gas, we're pushing those big Michelins from the rear tires into the ground, and we're getting a little bit more yaw as soon as we get on throttle. But it just digs into the ground, takes a set, and then goes. So we want to use that little bit of extra turn at the end when we get on the accelerator as best as we can. And that's just a quirk of this car. You can see with the rubber line here, or the wear line in the track, it's a pretty significant and pretty wide wear line. Again, I try to be a little bit tighter here, just because I can get on throttle and get my steering straighter earlier. But you want to be somewhere in here. You don't want to be out here on the left because the track does crown and falls off to the left a little bit. So this is no bueno out here. Inside, frankly, the closer in, the better, because one, you protect your inside from attack, and then two, you can take, in my opinion, a better line and not travel as far by riding the inside of the track. You can see what I did here going through here was when I did run out a little bit wide here, I have pretty significant steering. I'm having to delay my throttle as a result. But ultimately, because of that extra on throttle rotation that I was getting coming out of the corner, the car did eventually set where I wanted it to, and I did get it up nice and tight up to the secondary curbing on the back half of the corner. Whew.
What gear are you in through here?
So second or first, and it depends. I try to avoid going to first whenever I can because it's a lot of torque going through the wheels, but sometimes you can't get away with it. I think on this particular lap I did go into first, but try either way. I don't think there's an advantage or a disadvantage to either one, or there's advantages and disadvantages to each. I don't think there's a benefit of one being much better than the other. It's whatever you're most comfortable with. If you're in second gear, you tend to roll a little bit more speed, but you don't accelerate out of the corner as fast. If you're in first gear, it's very easy to overslow the corner, but when you go to throttle, you've got a ton of torque because of that first gear, and it kind of launches you out of the corner. Kind of whatever you're most comfortable with, and it's also setup dependent, how your car is set up. So try different things. So again,
to that point, Chris, are you running the short stack or the FIA on this one?
That's a good question. I'll have to look at it when we talk about setup after the track walk. I'll have to load the sim and I can show you exactly what I'm running, but I never looked at it. Okay, so coming in here, just showing it again. Late turn in. Try to keep it as close as possible. Understand that you're going to get a little bit more rotation right here, and kind of diamond the corner to go all the way around to get a good run coming out of there. Now we'll get a good run coming into NASCAR 3 is what it's called. NASCAR 3 is this This is 2, and then NASCAR 3 is the later one. NASCAR 3 is a very tricky corner, and it can be kind of terrifying because it's very fast, and the car is on a lot of edge, and you're trying to brake while turning and also accelerate while turning. It's just, there's a lot going on with the car. The key thing to think about for turn 2 and NASCAR 3 is we've got this little house here, this little barn, which is actually the tech shed for VIR. It's perfect in terms of when we come through 2, we line our car up with the tech shed and the curbing, and that is our brake zone. And then as we come up to the curbing, we get out, we ease off the brake, ease into our turning, and then we turn into NASCAR 3. So you can actually see here, full throttle coming in. Boom, right here from the driver's seat, I'm pretty much lined up as close as I can be to the tech shed. I start adding a little bit of brake, understanding I still have steering in the car. So the car, I'm braking with a little bit of steering. So I can't brake 100% because the car won't turn if that's the case. So it's about half of a brake pedal because I've got a little bit of steering. And then it's just enough to kind of set the nose of the car to get that final turn in. So keep that angle almost like a consistent angle all the way through here. Start bleeding off the brake, and as I'm coming off the brake, getting close to this curbing on the right, that's when I start to get off the brake, which is decreasing my deceleration. So while I'm not accelerating yet, I am slowing the rate of deceleration. If that's might be a weird way of saying it. I'm not braking as much. I'm not slowing down as quickly. So by getting off the brake, I'm maintaining that momentum that I was talking about at the beginning. So off the brake, letting all the grip of the tires be for cornering rather than accelerating or decelerating, so I can get a really good set and get a really good turn in angle right here. And then once the car takes that set and starts to turn in, boom, start to feed on throttle as I know I'm going to make this corner. What my goal is to get up here and basically get pretty darn close to the grass. You could use all of this curbing with the understanding that when you bump this curbing, the car is going to bump in the air, so you don't want to be full throttle while you're going over this curb. You kind of want to be accelerating or going quickly into the curb, and then you kind of let off the throttle so the car has a nice set, and then when you land on the back end, you can get back on the throttle. So you can see right here, my pedals, I don't have any input actually. I start to bring in a little bit of gas here. I hesitate over the curb, but I don't hit too much of it on this particular run. And then when I land on the backside, boom, 100% throttle and commit to it. We have all this run out over here. You can use 100% of it. That's the fast way through. Just understand that, you know, you don't want to be like, you want to be straightening the car out as you cross over this curb. You don't want to be having significant steering angle as you're getting out here because you're going to run out of road. If you're having trouble with this, try to keep it nice and tidy and maybe just straddle or right side tires on this curb. Don't go all the way over here and use all your run out. But as you get more and more comfortable with it, you can start realizing where you can get on throttle through NASCAR 3 and end up putting the car out over here. The other thing I'll say about NASCAR 3 is that you'll notice that as you cross over the mid-track point, you're crossing over the crown of the track. So you're actually having off camber right here as we turn in. Don't feel like you have to go all the way out to the grass and the curbing to set up for 3. Another really good line through here is actually about mid-track where you're not going over the camber line and then just turning in from there. Not only do you travel a shorter distance, but you have a little bit better grip on the turn-in point for NASCAR 3. So lots of lines, and this is actually a really good passing opportunity for people that only know how to run this line. You can easily sneak it up the inside here and make a really good pass on the inside here. Third gear through there. Okay, coming up to turn 4 and leading into what's called snake or the lower S's. Turn 4, we're going to brake. It feels always like you're going to the top of third gear coming out of NASCAR 3. And then when you hit the top of third gear, boom, on the brakes. Another thing you can look at is basically when the run out ends, you're going to cross over that point and boom, brake after that. It's kind of a sound and a feeling. There's no brake markers you can see other than that point when the run out stops right here. But it's somewhere around there. We're going to stay all the way over to the right. We're going to do a pretty firm 9-10 brake pedal threshold braking to slow the car down. And then we're going to downshift to second and we're going to clobber this inside curb. Understanding that when we clobber it, we need to be off the pedals because the car is getting unsettled. So you can see here, no pedals, no pedal input coming over the curb until you land on the back end. Then we can pick up the throttle pretty aggressively as we unwind our wheel. So as our wheel goes straight, boom, we can go full throttle for a brief moment between 4 and 5. And then 5, we're going to do again pretty much the same thing without braking. We're going to lift off the throttle so the car will turn in. We're going to clobber the curb again. When we clobber the curb, it's going to bounce the car up on the right, but when we land, it's going to give us some rotation as we clobber it, and we're going to add some throttle on the way down, which is going to give us that first initial rotation through here. Again, second gear through here. If we do it right, we'll end up pretty much all the way over here on track left. I try not to get on the rumbles, but the rumbles are your last warning of, hey, the dirt's coming up, don't go any further. But 9 times out of 10, I don't feel the rumble strip here. So we want to try to stay off of it. If we get to it, then you're pretty much on your way to the dirt and just be ready for it. But if we do it right, we don't feel it. Second gear, we get into the interior, we turn in. We're going to have to do a little bit of a little chicken lift here to get the weight, again, to settle on the nose to give us a good turn in. And then once we get that good turn in, we're in third gear at this point. Boom, we're going to apex it just like we did the other corners. Right side tires on the grass effectively. And then the same thing over here on the left. Boom, left side tires on the grass. We're trying to open the corner as much as possible, get on full throttle, and ride it all the way through. So let me back that up, because this is one of the more complicated parts on the track. Once you get it, it works really well and it flows really well, but it does take a little bit to get there, to be at speed. So second gear, slow the car down, aggressively turn it in, get up on the curb. You'll get a little bit of rotation from the curb. Then boom, you have a little bit of room in second gear that you can be full throttle, a little squirt of throttle, off the throttle to get the turn in for the second one. Boom, right in the throttle, then back to full throttle here. And then when do I shift up? Hold on one second. Let me listen to it, because I'm not totally sure. Second. Okay, so I'm shifting up right before turn in. So right here, second gear, kind of feeling the car. The car's wanting to understeer under full throttle, so I'm kind of playing with it a little. You get off the throttle a little bit, it takes a tuck in. And then boom, right here before we do our next turn, boom, I grab third. And at this point, I grab third for 2 reasons. One, I could be in second, but third gear, less torque through the wheels. I can use more of the throttle pedal to move the car around. If I'm in second gear, I have to be absolutely precise and millimeter perfect with my throttle pedal to get little deviations in the car. In third gear or higher gear, I can use more of the throttle pedal to be able to get those same little movements. So it's just easier to manipulate the car at that point. So third gear here, car takes a set, and it's kind of like just sending it in. We have the right line. Once we know we're going to hit the right line, boom, full throttle through this first one, the second one, third one, and the fourth one. We'll hit every single curbing, try to straighten the car as much as we can, because remember, as I said at the beginning, if you have your front wheels turned at all and you're under full throttle, you're not accelerating at the rate that you could if you had your wheels dead straight. So that's why we're just trying to drive as straight as possible through here, because we want our rate of acceleration to be as much as possible. All right, any question between the beginning of the track, that first sector? Nope. Okay, cool. All right, keeping going. We're coming into the really cool S part, or the S's, the upper S's here at VIR. In a word, they're terrifying. It doesn't matter what car you're in. Well, I guess maybe a really high downforce, low horsepower car, they're not as scary. But in most cars, I mean, the car is screaming and you're going 130, 140 miles an hour and you're trying to turn the car. That's kind of terrifying. But the nice thing about the GT3R is it's relatively little drama so long as we keep our hands nice and quiet. What I mean by that is our inputs are slow and deliberate. We're not jerking the wheel either way to unsettle the car. We're not jumping off the throttle at any point in this series. We're keeping the throttle planted. Our steering is nice and smooth, and we're keeping the car under us as we do the movements to the S's. And if we do that correctly, it should be no problem to be 100% flat out all the way up the S's, all the way to turn 10. So what it looks like is flat. We're going to hit the curbings at they're perfect apex points, so we treat them as such, right in the middle. Every single one is an apex, except for this last one. We want to treat the apex as right here where the grass and the track meet. That little corner is our apex point. And then over here on the right, we can get all the way as close as we want to this curbing. We can actually get on it if we want. We should be in 5th gear at this point. Coming up, Careful though, when you come and you crest out of this corner, you are coming up over a hill. So as you crest this corner, the weight of the car is getting light, so the tires aren't being pushed into the ground as much. So you're actually losing traction as you crest. As you do that, remember the weight of this car is all in the rear, over the rear axle or behind the rear axle. So the tendency is, if you have too much steering angle as you come over this crest, is a little bit of oversteer. It's nothing that can't be managed with maybe just a touch of correction the other way. But if you're not ready for it and it does step out and you're not aware that it's going to happen, you can definitely get yourself in a bad situation there. Another way to counteract it is if it, like for instance, if the track state is really hot or really greasy, you could always just do a little bit of a half lift of throttle here, and then bam, back to full throttle here, and just maybe scrub a couple miles an hour off the speed coming around this last corner, and it will drastically take out that oversteer. Or we could do a setup change to try to plant the back end a little bit more in this scenario if you're having trouble. But in general, it should be relatively easy to manage. The goal out of the entire S section is to end up on the right side of the track, setting up for turn 10. And turn 10 is incredibly fast and incredibly scary, both in real life and in sim. The goal here is we want to turn in. We'll actually be in 6th gear at this point, coming over that little crest. But we're going to turn in, downshift to 4th gear, and we're going to turn in what feels like way too early for this corner. It is so early. I'm always amazed at how early it feels like you got to turn in for this corner. So,
Chris,
yes.
can I go back to the entry point for the climbing S's?
Sure.
I noticed that you're in mid-track.
Yes.
I know in real life I'm usually track right over there.
You can be. You can be anywhere in here, frankly. But with the GT3R, there's so much grip, and especially on this first left-hander, that if you're all the way over here on the left, when you turn in, you're going to be pointed to the left, and you're going to have to turn right at some point. So if we can take a shallower angle here, we're trying to basically create a straight line through the S's as possible. So if you're over here on the right, you're not starting on a straight line because you're going to be doing really wide angles. If you're in the middle, you're taking a little bit of a more narrow S factor, if that makes sense. So like when we come into right here, from the middle, if you're over here on the right side, you're going to have to turn the wheel more to get down to the first apex. And then your car is going to be pointed way over to the left. Whereas my car, when I come through here, it's already pointed at the next one. So the angles are like this, right? So you're going to have to rotate your car, 45 degrees potentially to get to the next one. Whereas I basically don't even have to. It's pretty much a straight line. So I'm just trying to draw as straight a line through the S's as I can.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so it's all the way up to 6th gear. And then right here we get the car in a dead straight line. We don't want to be facing to the right. We don't want to be facing to the left. We want to be in a dead straight line because we need to scrub some speed. What's more important here going into 10 is getting the car in a stable position for you to get to the brake and get in a good turn-in spot for 10 than being dead on the right side for track right. If you overcooked it or you missed the turn-in point for this right-hander turn 9, and let's say you end up mid-track going into 10, that's fine. You're going to take 10 from mid-track. You take it from wherever you end up. It's just ideally you want to be on the right side just because you can carry more speed. But if you're over here, another car with over to the left, you're just going to be a little slower on entry. You're going to have to slow the car down a little bit more. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to move the car over to the right under braking just to turn left. Because again, you're going to have the car facing the wrong way and you're going to have to end up turning the car like 120 degrees versus, 45 degrees of my car. So keep that in mind. You take the corner where you end up. So probably a 7 pedal just to scrub a little bit of speed, downshift down to 5th, and then as we're going in, we downshift to 4th, and I've grabbed 4th right here. But you can see how early I've turned in. My left side tires look like they're going to be in the grass, but because this corner is so flat, it kind of just understeers and the whole car kind of just pushes out. And so when you actually hit the apex point, you're actually okay. And we want to take all this curving, as much of this curving as we possibly can. And you can actually see where I'm getting back on throttle because, again, throttle, driving through a corner and getting on throttle stabilizes the rear of the car. If we were still on the brakes somewhere right here, that means that we're putting all the weight on the front of the car, and the rear of the car has very little grip, and we're trying to turn. So what's going to happen? What's going to be the first thing that lets go? The rear. So we're going to get an oversteer situation coming through a corner where we definitely don't want that. So when we get on the throttle early at the apex or just before apex, we're actually taking the weight balance of the car, pushing the rear of that car into the pavement, giving us a ton of grip in the rear. So you're not going to get oversteer. And if anything, you're going to get understeer because the front end of the car gets lighter relatively. So there's less grip up front. So we play into that understeer, we drive through it, and 100% full throttle, early, fourth gear. I try not to get up on this curbing. It's that emergency. I went in too fast, and I have a little bit more room if I need it. But in general, I try to basically touch the curb and nibble it. On this particular lap, because I was chasing a lap time, I killed it pretty good. But you don't want to go over it. That's as far over to the right as you want to go. Any further, obviously, you're in the grass, and it becomes really unstable. If you get in the grass here or at any point at anywhere here, get out of the gas, or slowly get out of the gas. Don't jump off the gas. And just open your hands and try to steer it and get control of the car. There's a surprising amount of control you can have so long as you didn't go off sideways. But if you went off with just a little bit of an angle, you open your hands, keep a little bit of throttle just to keep the balance of the car, and you can drive the car back on here and still make this corner at Oak Tree, no problem. The problems end up is when you get off grass and you keep your foot in it, right? Because you don't want to lose time. And then at that point, the car is unstable. You've got a lot of torque through the rear wheels. It's just not a good time. So, take your medicine, get control of your car, bring it on nice and safely, and then continue on. Coming up into Oak Tree, or the first part of Oak Tree, we've got some really good boards here for braking. We want to get the car over to the left to open the corner as much as possible. The 2 board is my target here. And again, like turn 1, it's also the change of elevation coming into this braking zone. So before the 2 board, there's a pretty significant uphill that's assisting our car in slowing down. At the 2 board, it plateaus. So that help with the elevation goes away. So if you find yourself braking before the 2 board and saying, man, I'm overslowing, I'm having to get off and just coast through this next portion of the corner, realize that if you do go past the 2 board, all of a sudden the track is flat and you're trying to do the same braking on a flat surface as opposed to an increased elevation surface, and you're not going to have the same brake pedal or the same rate of deceleration. So just be aware. At the 2 board, it switches pretty significantly. So I tend to brake just before the 2 board to get a little bit of the advantage of the hill. And then I kind of just manage the brake through the first part. And that's all this first part and this first apex of Oak Tree is managing your brake pedal. You don't have to be 100% brake. You also don't have to be no brake. You can manage it by letting off the brake midway through to decrease the rate of deceleration, so maintaining your speed. Or you can get on more brake as the car starts to straighten out in certain spots. The theory or the thought process into the beginning of Oak Tree is firm initial brake pedal, because I need to slow the car down from a pretty rapid rate of speed, but then I need to also turn the car. So it's firm brake pedal while the car is dead straight and the wheels are straight. And then as I turn the wheel of the car, I'm going to get off the brake pedal and allow the grip of the tires to go from braking to lateral G, so to cornering. And then as the car takes the corner and gets back into another straight line for another brake zone, back on the brake again for the final brake zone before the actual Oak Tree corner. And then as I turn into Oak Tree, I get off the brake. So it's the string theory of I've got a steering wheel. At the bottom of the steering wheel, there's a string from the bottom of the steering wheel attached to my pedals, meaning that if the steering wheel is straight and I'm going in a straight line, the string has enough slack to allow me to push the throttle all the way down or be at 100% brake. As I turn the wheel, the string gets pulled up, which means I can't push the pedals all the way down. So if I'm at 90 degrees in a steering angle, I can't push the pedals at all because the string has pulled the pedal. There's too much tension. That's the strings theory. So straight steering wheel, you can use your pedals to their fullest ability. Any kind of turning, you're going to have a sacrificed range in your pedals because the grips the tires don't have enough grip to give you both. They can't give you 100% braking and 100% turning. It's physically impossible. So you've got to make concessions. So that's the idea here, is managing that string theory, managing that grip of the tire between braking and cornering here. So as I said, coming in, pretty firm brake on the way up the hill. I start to turn the car in just before the little board here, but frankly, I'm not looking at that. I'm looking over here at the apex curbing to find out when I can see that. I'm trying to drive my car over this curbing so you can actually see as I start to turn in. Look at my brake pedal, boop, down to like 15% or less as I've turned into the beginning part. And I maintain that so I can have a little bit of brake, but I'm still turning the car. And then once I get the car straightened up past that apex point, look, I've gone back up to about 40% brake. And then at this point, I need to do my final turn for Oak Tree. I'm going to get off the pedal completely. Boom, there it is. Off the pedal. I'm letting the tires have 100% of their grip that they can give to cornering. I've got a ton of steering. I mean, I'm freaking, my hands are crisscrossed over. So I've got 180 degrees of steering angle in the car, but I have to because it's such a tight corner. But then I start to pick up the throttle once I realize I'm going to make the corner. And I'm using that throttle pedal in, I use second gear here. I don't go down to first. In second gear to, as we said in turn one, get that rear end to kind of take that little bit of extra rotation under throttle, let that diff do its work, take it squat, and then get a good run coming out of the corner. And as I go to full throttle, I'm opening my hands to get a really solid run coming out of this corner. If you come out of Oak Tree and you're getting oversteer on your way out, you're getting to throttle too soon. And any type of, like, if you're getting into traction control or you're oversteering through Oak Tree, you're losing speed because you're not accelerating. So if you're coming through there and you have any oversteer, you're not accelerating, so you're not going fast. Ideally, the way it works is as you unwind your steering wheel, you're adding throttle, getting to throttle as soon as possible, right on the edge of the rear tire grip, and you're launching yourself out of the corner, not spinning the tires, not getting into traction control. I try to avoid this curb on the right because all that does is while it kind of extends the corner and you can kind of cut it, it's a pretty significant bump, and you have to delay your throttle until you land and do like a bounce on the backside. Whereas here, if I don't touch the curbing, I'm already at 80-90% throttle at this point, whereas I would just now start to be getting on the throttle if I hit the curb. So some people make it work, and again, it's setup dependent, but for me, I tend to try to avoid it. All right, any question through the S's and Oak Tree? Nope. Okay, good.
Do you use the tree? Do you use the tree at the top of the S's as a guide, as a point?
Which tree is that? Is it that big one right there in the middle?
Yeah, that big one.
So I can't. You're saying that guy right there?
Yeah, that one.
I'm not. I'm looking at the curbings on the way through. But I mean, if let's put it this way. Markers in the distance are fantastic. If this tree is helping you in some way, positioning your car in a certain way, use it because it does two things. It keeps your eyes up, so you're looking way down in the distance as opposed to 10 feet out in front of your car. So whatever you can do to look further down track, absolutely. But for me, I don't even know that tree existed, frankly.
Come here, little guy. Come here.
All right, so just take a look at that, and if it works, it works. Keep using it, but I haven't used it for any reason, personally. All right, so we got a good run coming out of Oak Tree, running down the straightaway, screaming down the straightaway, one of the longest straights in North America. I think it's longer than Coda even. It's just a long time. You're hitting basically terminal velocity in these cars. And we're entering into the roller coaster. So the roller coaster is a really fun part of the track. But we need to make sure a couple of things. We need to make sure we have a really good brake marker and we can repeat it over and over. And we got to make sure we're having really good ability to modulate our brake pedal through there. So, hey Tony, I'm gonna. Okay, yeah, he just vanished, so we're good. So we got to make sure we're modulating our brake pedal a lot like Oak Tree. The people that are going to be fast in the entry of roller coaster are those that can modulate the brake pedal like a throttle pedal. So what I'm looking for here in this car is I'm looking for the 2 board. We've got a lot of elevation assisting our brake coming up the hill. If there's a really grippy track, you could potentially maybe even go to the 1 board, but it's really tough. The 1 board or any further period in, I can't slow the car down. Maybe you can, but I can't. So, about the 1.5 board is about as far as I'm willing to push it. And in fact, if it's in the race, I'm going to be braking pretty much at the 2. And what we want to do is we want to be, boom, threshold braking immediately on the entry into this corner. And we need to basically position our car as best as we can to have a straight line between the brake point and this first curbing. So as you can see here, I'm trying to brake in a straight line, but there will be a little bit of steering angle through here because it is a turn that we're braking through. And as we're turning, I'm going to get off the brake to allow the car to actually turn. If I'm in ABS and I start trying to turn the wheel, the car is not going to turn. It's just going to understeer into oblivion. So we got to allow the little bit of front end grip by getting a little bit off the brake. So you can see right there what I did. I am on, boom, basically 90% brake pedal, 85, 90% threshold braking here. But then as I start to turn into the corner, you see I come down to about maybe a 65% brake pedal. So the car will actually turn. And then once I get the car turned in the right direction, so I'm actually 50% right here. And then at this point right here, I have another straight line that I can use to brake at the top of the hill. Boom. Well, I didn't do it as well. But usually I have another little bit of feeling of braking as I crest this hill here. Boom. I know you have a little bit more room where you can get back on the brakes and slow the car down a little bit more. We want to be on a little bit on the left side of the track, turn in a little bit early. It always feels earlier than you think. And then use this curb as much as you can to get the car to help rotate through. So we want to get up on the curb. It'll help rotate us around in second gear. And then when we land on the backside, boom, back to full throttle and ride full throttle around. I'm noticing that this car has a really big, or at least my setup, has a really big tendency to understeer through here. So if I miss this curbing on the right and I just stay on the track, I feel like I'm overslowing the car at this point because the front end's just trying to understeer off into the back of off the track. We're going downhill. We're off camber. Everything is saying on this particular corner, we're going to run you off into the grass. So you got to do everything you can to try to get the car rotated, but still understand that you need to maintain your momentum and get on throttle as soon as you can on the way out. Ideally, what will end up happening is you'll run all the way over here to track left on the exit. But this car has enough grip in the car that in second gear that you can, boom, be full throttle and ride full throttle to the left-hander. You may need to do a little bit of a lift here, depending if you're too close to the curbing on the left side, just to make sure you make the corner. But if you come through this first corner and you end up like mid-track, like right a little bit further right here, yeah, you can be 100% full throttle in second gear down the hill. So you can see here, a little bit of a lift, then boom, back to full throttle. Opening our hands the whole way to allow the car to have the grip to take full throttle. We're not fighting the car. We're letting the car drive where it wants to go. And then coming into hog pin, the last 2 corners, we're going to turn in off that curbing. I'm still full throttle. And then basically when I get maybe a car length before the candy stripe curbing, I get on the brakes. It's a light brake. It's not a heavy brake because we're steering the car. We're going downhill. There's a lot of motion and lateral force still in the car under this braking point. I get up on the curb. I'm 4th gear. I go down to 3rd when I land on the backside. I'll get back on the brakes again on the backside. Take the curbing on the right. And then if we do it right, when we land on the backside of that curbing, 100% throttle, plenty of grip in the car. We don't want to we want to try to keep it we want to keep it about mid-track on the way out. We don't want to go all the way out here because it's off camber and we start to run out of room. We want a little bit of wiggle room or a little bit of danger room in case we do make a mistake. So about mid-track all the way through there. And if we do it right, we can double apex that corner in 3rd gear all the way through, all the way down the straightaway. So let me back it up and show it again. So we'll take that corner in roller coaster, 2nd gear, boom, back full. Maybe do a little bit of a lift, shift up to 3rd gear, let the car go where it wants to go. Turn in, light brake just to scrub a little speed off the brake, and then back on the brake on the back end. Turn in, 3rd gear, boom, land, full throttle. Let those big fat tires dig into the ground and launch you out of the corner. All right, any questions for the last sector? I'll run this back again at full speed from the cockpit so you can see kind of what it looks like. Nope? Okay, so let's give it a shot. Turn down the volume a little. All right, so screaming down into turn 1. we're going to be looking for that 3 board. Hard threshold brake, 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 brake. Turn in what feels early. Try to ride the curve a little bit. Bring it nice and tight. Apex the second one on the gray curbing. Look for the little hut, the red house. There it is. Brake. Now shift to third. Off the brakes. Boom. Back to throttle after the curbing. Brake after we get back on track. Kill the curbing on the left. Full throttle. Off the throttle. Ride the throttle. Third gear. Boom. Back to full throttle. And we know we can make the corner and ride it all the way through. Straight a line as possible through the S's. A little bit of a breather coming into the first left-hander of the S's. I'm in 6th gear already, so we'll just ride this all the way around 6th gear. Brake just after the crest, boom. Turn in early, 4th gear, back on power. Brake at the 2 on the way up the hill. Off the brake, off the brake, and then back on the throttle and hammer it. Run all the way down the straightaway. Another deep breath, look around us, check our mirrors, see if anybody's nearby, anybody's going to get a run on us, or if they did get a run on us at a tree, what they're thinking or how their car is positioned. Look for the 2 board as the braking zone in the roller coaster. Firm brake. Off the brake. Back on brake. Take the curbing on the inside. Back to full power. Up to 3rd gear, let the car go where it wants to go. Turn in, brake, off brake, brake, 3rd gear. Boom, full throttle all the way through, double apex. And straight away. So, like I said, that was a 44, mid 44. Felt like a pretty good repeatable lap. But don't feel like you got to go out there and go try to chase a 44 and a half down. Work towards it. This track it's really easy to get aggravated on this track. And what I mean by that, when you get aggravated on this track, is if you make a mistake, you drop a wheel in the grass, you go forever because every corner seems to fall off the track. So when you go off, you just keep going until you end up in the Armco, which feels like in the next county. So make sure you're driving underneath your abilities at the beginning, especially if you're learning this track. Don't try to go run 110% right out of the gate because it's tough. And it's really easy to get discouraged like that. Drive at 90%, or hell, drive at 80%, and then slowly work your way out, gathering more and more speed where you get comfortable. Treat it like real life. If you jumped in a race car for the first time at VIR, you wouldn't go try to drive 100% on your first out lap, because it would hurt, probably. You'll probably drive at about 80%, or maybe even less, and then slowly work it up. Treat the sim the same way, and you'll get a lot more out of it. All right, any questions about VIR and the line or anything like that?
Hey, Chris, could you go around to 2?
Yeah.
I just want to point out, I see a lot of people in 2 actually hitting the curb and the apex on the left, and all it does is upset the car. I'm talking about right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't hit that.
Don't hit that, because it takes the car so long to settle that you don't have good braking time. If you stay on the track there, all 4 of your tires are there for braking. If you hit that apex or that curbing right there, by the time the car settles, you've run out of time to brake.
Yeah, and this was one of the things I was going to say in terms of, well, I got something, I mean, it's one thing for me to say, oh, you can pass here on the inside, but I'm going to actually show you. Let me bring up my channel real quick. Okay, so, no, that's not it. Okay, here you go. So this is me at VIR a couple weekends ago. I'm in an M4 GT4. This is the race start. And this is exactly what I mean by that's a good passing zone. So if we go ahead and go to the race start, come on, where's green flag? It should be right here. Okay, so first a couple comments on a race start. We always like to joke in PCA, oh, people don't drive like that, 3 wide, 4 wide going to turn 1. They absolutely do, and this is an example of it. So, the Kendrick car was immediately looking to go 3 wide, right at start finish. I don't know where he thought he was going to go. But if you look up front, I mean, we're 3 wide, in some cases 4 wide up front going into turn 1. But coming out of turn 1 and keeping it tight like I normally I said that I like to do, you'll see right here, here we go into turn 2 as we're talking about. No one is touching that curbing on the inside. Everybody's missing it. But this is where you can make a pass right here. So the racing line is this wide right-hander that we would do if we were on our own. But if you're coming up behind a car, we're going to follow this blue car and take that shallow line. So boom, right here. Turned in way early, took the corner away from him. He can't turn down on us. We're already here. And we're going to follow the blue car all the way through. And that's the idea, is that on that particular corner, there's so much grip on the inside. It's the person who gets there first is the one that's going to prevail. If you just drive the normal line like no one's around, you can, and somebody's trying to pass there, or you're trying to take advantage of somebody through that corner, you can absolutely get off the brake a little earlier, roll up inside the inside, and then kind of overslow the car on the inside and take away the inside there, just like I did. So that's a great passing point through there. And then this is just fun because we're too wide through the snake, which is really, really cool. And then just basically out muscling that other BMW to kind of get position going through there. But you can see here when we drive through, and the question about, you know, the angle that you take going into the S's. Here in this car, because this is about as aerodynamic as a bar of soap, I'm taking all of the room, right? I'm all the way on track right and maximizing my entry into the left-hander. And it's because the car doesn't have as much mechanical grip as the GT3R. The GT3R is wings and really wide tires and all that fun stuff. In this car, I've got to take as much as I can because I need all the room and all the angle in order to take it properly. So that's the difference between, you know, maybe a car that you run on your own time versus running a GT3R, GT3 car and the grip that it has. So it was just wanted to show a real world example of how in this particular corner you can take that inside line and take it away from somebody and make it a really good passing opportunity. But great point.
Yeah, can you show that, Chris? Can you show that again through the NASCAR 1, 2, and 3 into the entry? Just how he did it.
Yeah, which one, sim or real?
But the real life one, because I see a lot of guys try to take that first turn into the entry of the S's on the. They try to pass there, and it usually creates carnage and chaos on the first right-hand turn entering the S's.
Oh, okay. So here we come into turn 2. Nice and tight. Understanding that car is out there. Like, we're not using all the curb, but I know I've got the right spot for him on this one. He can't hold it around the outside. So you're talking about this one right here?
No, next turn. Yeah, the next one up here. Like, guys will dive in here on the inside, force the guy off the line to the right, and then it creates carnage right here.
Yeah. Don't notice how, for as hectic as this race start was with cars all over the place, notice something at this point. Every single car is in line. And the car that I am alongside coming through the right-hander, preceding this BMW, he has to account that I'm out there somewhere, but he doesn't know where. He just knows I'm alongside him. So he has to overslow coming through this corner. So he knows he's slow coming out of that corner. And then at this point, he sees me. But what does he do? He doesn't stay there and say, I'm going to fight you going into the next corner. He lifts. He completely lifts and lets me, you can see him in the mirror, he lifts and lets me have the apex on the corner, or some of the apex, right? And that's an idea of, yeah, okay, he realizes he's beat. He realizes it's a long race. And he's not racing me on every single corner, understanding that if we go too wide through there, best case scenario, we're just both incredibly slow relative to the rest of the field, and we're losing time to this pack in front. Worst case scenario, we come together, he hits me, and he turns me, and we have a big incident, right? So think about it in the long run. Get in line on the fast stuff that you can't go too wide through because you're going to be really slow if you are. But you look at the entire line up before us. Every single car, we were 4 wide going into turn 1. We have all somehow managed to get into single file going in through this tight little area. So just keep it in the back of your mind. Do you really want to potentially end the race in turn 5 on the first lap? So.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good example of the difference between sim racing and real life racing, because a lot of guys in the sim world will force the issue there. But as you pointed out, in real life, you'll both end up in the dirt and the grass. In the sim, it tends to spin people and create just a total bottleneck right there.
Absolutely. Don't try to be like, even the move that I did in the S's, going around the outside, is not the wisest move. it's only wise if you have another car playing blocker, and that's why I follow the blue car through there. But otherwise, you don't want to be too wide through there because you're going to be losing so much time to everybody else. So great questions, great comments, love it. So the other thing I wanted to do real quick is, and I think there's going to be test drive sessions and stuff like that are coming up. So feel free to jump in, take a look at them. It's 7 o'clock. I think some of them probably will start either practice races. I don't know the whole schedule of them, and I apologize. They switch all the time. But check the hosted sessions and ask one of your friends. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to load up the sim again, and I'm going to go into the garage, and I'm going to point out some things that you can do from the setup point of the car to maybe help out with what you're feeling in the car and what you want the car to do, things that can help. So if you don't want to hear that, feel free to jump out and jump into the other sessions. If you want to hear this, just stick around for maybe another 15 minutes or so, and ask specific questions too, because setup is a black art as well, in terms of you can go crazy in depth with this stuff. I am an amateur when it comes to the setup for sure, but I know enough that I know how to make the car do what I want it to do, and I can kind of try to share that with you. So here we are in the sim. So I'm going to open the garage up, and so for Class C, the world is our oyster with the garage page. So if you don't know how to get to it, I assume you all do, but just in case you don't, it's up here. It's the garage button. You click the garage button. We've got these little tabs, and the little tabs will dictate what category we want to change in the car. The first page is usually always tires and aero. In the GT3R, it's tire pressures. For sim racing, keep them at minimum. The lower the tire pressure, the lower the heat in the tire, the more theoretical mechanical grip in the tire. Think of it this way. The more you pump up a tire, the more balloon shape it gets, which means the less amount of rubber actually touching the road. So if you have a pancake tire or no air in the tire, it just kind of blobs out, right? And just as pancakes on the ground. Well, that's a tremendous amount of rubber touching the track. If your tires are pumped up like bike tires, you have a tiny little sliver in the middle of your tire touching the track, and that's all of your contact patch. So minimal tire pressures help get as much grip as we can, mechanical grip in the car off the tires. If you're running ovals or something, you can change your tire pressures to affect how the car handles in the ovals. But because iRacing currently does not model tire carcass deformation, we want to run minimum. Because you are not getting the most out of your tires or the grip. You're leaving grip on the table with no downside if you start pumping your tires up for any reason. So keep them at minimum. It's one of the quirks of the sim. And in real life, manufacturers of tires, Pirelli, Michelin, and then also the series themselves, mandate a minimum tire pressure that you can't go below starting tire pressure. And the reason they do that is because teams will go lower if they could, understanding that they are taking the risk of damaging the sidewall of the tires on the first couple laps while the tires come to temp. But the lower you can run your pressures, typically, the more grip you can have. All right, so what that means is, well, let's talk about notes. So notes is exactly that. It's a place that you can type in all the notes you want. If you want to make changes, you can just highlight whatever, type whatever you want, hit save. Great way to be able to say what, if you're really organized and you want to keep track of what you've changed and stuff like that, you can write that in the notes. It's a handy little notepad down here. Typically the cars iRacing, they will put information in here of what the lights do for the car. So lockup lights, brake lights, stuff like that. So it's just good summary of some of the stuff you see on the dashboard in the car. And then the notes themselves will actually lay out what the iRacing standard baseline setups, what they do and what the goals are, and when you should use one, when you shouldn't use one. And then sometimes, and this is one of the cars that they do, they actually go through and list all the tracks or a lot of the tracks that you would run this car on, and they list what they think would be a good iRacing setup to start on. So for instance, VIR, here you go, they say it's a high medium downforce track. So you could go into iRacing setups and go high downforce or medium downforce and meet what iRacing recommends on their end. Furthermore, if you keep going down further, it will go into details about what you want, how to change the car in terms of what you're feeling in really easy ways. But you can get and start reading a lot of this I'll go into a little bit of that right now, and we can talk about how that feels. So the chassis page is probably the page that we would be the most in terms of making adjustments. The way that they're organized is you've got the front end of the car up here at the top, and then you've got the rear end of the car down here at the bottom. Each car looks maybe a little bit different in terms of how they stylize it, but in the GT3R, for whatever reason, they've kept them in perfect columns. Usually the front is like in the middle to represent the front of the car, and then you got the four corners of the car, and then you've got the rear of the car, but whatever. So in the GT3R, we can change ARB, which is the FARB setting. We can change the toe end of the car, which is where the front of or how the tires are pointed at the front of the car. So toe in would be pigeon-footed, like this. Toe out would be the opposite, would be the front of the tires pointing away from each other. Your fuel level, your master cylinders, which is basically in a way affecting how your brake pedals are working. I tend to not even touch that. I use brake bias if I want to change brake balance. So whatever the stock one is fine there. And then your brake pads. Low friction is going to be a less abrupt change. High friction is going to be an incredibly abrupt change. But even so, it's really hard to feel the difference between them. So try different things, but that's totally up to driver feel. Everything over here on the in-car dials, it's exactly that. They're just dials. There's settings like brake pressure bias, your traction control settings. So I think it's got like 11 traction control settings, or 6 or whatever. But you can change on this particular one, like all the different variations of how much traction control you have in the car. Your ABS setting, and this will be how fast ABS comes in and how aggressive it comes in. I notice a lot of the pros, and when I mean pros, I mean like VRS or professionals garages that make setups, they run it on max ABS, the wet setting. I think the reason they do that is because when you go into ABS under a wet setting, it comes in smoothly and it comes in early, versus a dry setting, it will come in more abruptly. And I think a lot of the professional sim racers are using ABS because it's a tool that they can use to brake consistently. So your mileage will vary. I usually dial it a few off of whatever VRS or those setups do, but try different, see what it feels like. In the rear, we can change the ARBs, the toe again, and then this is where you have your variations for wing. So let's talk about general idea of what you want to do with this track. Oh, and then Chad, apparently it's the short stack, so I always run short stack. So in general, the stiffer part of the car is going to have less mechanical grip. So a car develops grip as it's compressing its suspension. And if you have a really soft suspension, it takes time for a car to take a set on that suspension. So think of like a Mazda MX-5, right? You turn in, the car rolls over to one side. Well, as the car continues to roll and compress things and roll, until it stops compressing and rolling, it's gaining grip as it does that. So as the suspension is moving, the grip is increasing. If you had an MX-5 that had no roll, if it was instantaneous like a Formula One car, as soon as that car turns, boom, that's as much grip as it has. So the easy way to remember it is stiffer, less grip, softer, more grip. And what I mean by that, I mean mechanical grip, how much grip the car can give. So, and for ARBs, you can go stiff or you can go soft is usually the realm of possibility. So if, for the instance, on the front of the car, you've got a lot of understeer in the car. What that means is the car is plowing. You turn the wheel, it doesn't turn, it just keeps going straight. That's understeer. What's happening is your front tires are losing grip before the rear tires lose grip. So that's what's creating understeer. One way to change the balance or to give you more grip up front is to soften the front of the car. And one of the easiest ways to do that is softening the ARB. If you soften the roll bar, that's going to give you more mechanical grip. Now, a softer suspension on the car or a softer setting is going to mean that the suspension takes a little bit longer to reach its maximum grip. But ideally and theoretically, it gives more grip as it reaches that state, as it takes longer to reach that state. So you soften, if you have understeer, you soften the front ARB, you're going to have more grip at the front, which means it should take away some of that understeer. Now, everything is a trade-off. You can't just make the front ARB as soft as it goes and make the rear ARB as soft as it goes and say, oh, I've got maximum grip, I should go the fastest now. it's all relative. So it's softer relative to the rear. So if you don't make a change on the rear of the car, but you soften the front, then you should dial out understeer. But what's going to happen is you're going to start inducing oversteer on the alternative. Now, if you've got a ton of understeer on the front, as you take away understeer, it's going to actually be starting to reach neutral, which is going to start to feel better. But you go too far on the pendulum, and you're going to have oversteer on the car. And all of a sudden, the rear end is trying to swap ends on you because it is losing grip before the front end. So it's a balancing game of where you want to be. The inverse is also true. So if you have a lot of oversteer in the car, so the car tries to swap ends on you, what you want to do is you want to either take away grip on the front, so make it stiffer, so increase the ARB, or soften the rear ARB, add grip to the rear. Those are the easiest changes to make in terms of how the car handles in corners. Another thing you can do is the rake of the car. So that is the, how high the rear of the car is relative to the front. If you have zero rake, the car is 100% flat. If you have lots of rake, you look like a drag car or something like that. These cars have a lot of aerodynamics in them. And when you start messing with the rake, you can really affect the way they handle. If you add rake to a car, what you're essentially doing is you're essentially moving grip to the front end of the front axle and taking it away from the rear. And when you do that, you're inducing oversteer into the car. The car will like to turn really quickly, like corner entry and stuff like that with lots of rake, but it's going to be very snappy. The rear end's going to really want to dance around on you. If you have too much oversteer in the car, you can remove rake out of the car. And what that's going to do is that's going to add more grip to the rear of the car and take away from the front, which means you're going to have more grip back here, less grip up front, which means you're going to take the car from an oversteering situation to a neutral or understeering situation. So think of it like this. If the car is sitting on a scale, you start to move it up front, there's less grip back here because there's less weight on the car, on the rear tires, and there's more weight on the front, and therefore more weight, push the tires in the ground, they get nice and fat like pancakes, you have more grip. So moving rake around is going to affect how the car handles around corners. You don't have to do a lot, like a couple clicks here and there. And the way you change rake is the spring perch offset. So you have a ride height here that you can see. So for this particular instance, it's 25.85. You should do them in pairs. So if you wanted to increase the rake, you would change the spring perch to the left. So you're decreasing the spring perch, which is increasing the ride height. And you can see in real time, the ride height is increasing. You don't need to do more than a couple of clicks, frankly. If you start doing like half-inch changes, the car is going to really not like it. You're going to see it. Finally, another change you can do if the car is really you can't seem to fine-tune it to where you want to feel it, you can change your spring rates. So this particular car, I think, has got, quite a significant amount of spring rates. But it's the same adage. The higher the spring rate, the stiffer the car is going to feel. The stiffer the car, the less mechanical grip. So if you have really high spring rates in the back of the car, you're going to be stiffening the rear of the car, which means you're going to have oversteer. If you soften the rear spring rates, you're going to have a softer rear on the car, which means you're going to have potentially more grip, which means less oversteer. Same thing with the front. If at any time you forget any of these, you can kind of hover over them and you'll get a little tool tip. And it will tell you what's going on in terms of general what happens to a change in the car. So in general, what do I try to do when I get a car that I've never driven, or a car like this, or a 911? So for the 911, I always tend to run a stiffer ARB in the rear of the car than the front, because I want oversteer. And the reason I want oversteer is because the car inherently has an understeery profile. All the weight is on the rear of the car, which means there's a lot of grip in the rear tires of this particular car. There's no weight on the front of the car except when there's fuel. And then as fuel burns off, there's even less weight. So the front tires really don't like to turn unless you're under braking. So what I try to do is I try to set the car up where on other cars it would feel very oversteery. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want the car, I'm leaning into where the grip is on the car, which is in the rear. So stiffen up the rear, make it more responsive, make it more oversteery, and hopefully I can get better turn in on the front end where it tends to be weak in general. So I tend to make a stiffer ARB in the rear relative to the front. Now the new car isn't quite as sensitive to that as it used to be, but that was generally my idea behind it. I tend to run relatively light or soft spring rates, just because I like a slower car. I don't really like really fast, nervous cars. I like slower, so I like the added mechanical benefit of a softer car, and I don't mind having to wait on the car in corners. I actually enjoy that, but that's my driving style. If you're someone that likes a nervous car, that wants something that's instantaneously responsive, then you may like higher spring rates, and give it a shot. And then you have a dampers tab. So dampers are your shock settings, in other words, for shocks. You've got two different compression zones. You've got high speed and low speed. High speed compression is curb strikes, bumps, really significant bumps and curb strikes. Low speed is the transient maneuvers between braking and accelerating. So as you brake, when the car is shifting its weight around, how it shifts its weight around under normal driving conditions, left to right, stuff like that. Oddly enough, this car, you cannot change the left and right independent of each other. It's only front and rear. That's a little bizarre. It's the only car I know to do this. But in general, what you want to do is think about the rebound first. The rebound is how fast the shock returns to its normal state after being compressed. So think of rebound. If you have a really, I always forget, is it really soft? More low speed rebound slows the rate at which the damper extends. Okay, so adding clicks to the rebound will slow the rate at which the shock extends. So think of it this way. Let's say you're going into a brake zone and you're slamming into a brake zone and you are getting off the brake. If you didn't have a shock, as soon as you got off the brake, the car would extend back to its normal state because the springs would push it back up. If you have a large set on the low speed rebound of that, the car is going to slowly extend back off from that compressed state. So it's going to be a slower transition up. When you do that, what ends up happening is, let's say, what you're doing is you're keeping the weight on the front end of the car for longer, even after you get off the brakes, and potentially even when you get on the throttle. So you're slowing the rate at which the car transitions its weight off of the front of the car. So that means that more weight on the front of the tires, which gives them more grip, which gives you more steering and more agility in the front of the car. So a slow rebound is going to prevent that from happening. So theoretically you keep more of that grip on the front even after you get off the brake. So really good for cars that like to understeer. If you put that setting on the rebound, you're retarding the quickness at which it bounces off that. The compression does the same thing, but on the other side. So it's the rate at which a shock compresses. So if you slow down the rate of compression, let's say you're going again to the braking zone, you're about to hit the brakes, you slam on the brakes. If you have a really high compression, you are slowing the speed at which the car goes onto the front. This may be really beneficial in a situation where you've got a car that's really nervous on braking. So you want to keep some weight on the rear tires as long as possible. So having really firm compression in the front will slow down the rate at which you're getting that compression on the front tires. So anyway, like I said, I know enough to be dangerous, but I tend not to mess too much with the rebounds. Let's put it this way. I was reading somewhere, at least in real life, you do all the other adjustments on the car to get it where you want, and then the shocks are there to give you like the last couple of tenths that you're looking for. There's a very, very fine coarse adjustment, very, very fine tuning adjustment, not a coarse adjustment for changing the behavior of a car. So change the dampers if you feel like you need it. There's many times where I change dampers and go from full soft to full firm, and I can't feel a difference driving the car. So it is what it is. These are where you're going to be making the most of your adjustments. I would stick to, if you've never done a setup on a car, stick to your ARBs. That's the easiest way to do it. And then also stick to maybe potentially your wing setting. High wing is going to give you lots of downforce at high speed, which will make it stabler, but it's also going to induce understeer. Lower wing is going to take away grip on your rear tires at high speeds, and it's going to induce oversteer as opposed to understeer. it's also going to make you faster down the straightaway. So play around with it. That's one of the best things about open setups is what works for me is not going to work for you. It's not going to work for the next guy. So the world is your oyster in terms of you finding something. And if you've never done open setups before, I kind of envy you, because this is an opportunity to find a way to make a car suit your driving style to make you go faster. If you've only ever driven fixed setups or iRacing setups or baseline setups, and you've always wondered, man, the car just doesn't feel right, or I'm always having to fight it or something like that, open setups allows you to create a car that is like a tailored suit, makes it feel a lot more comfortable to you so you can push it harder. So it's a lot of fun. But as you can see, I mean, the permutations and what you can change and is almost infinite. And so good luck, because there's a lot of people that spend a lot of times on setups. And it's just, you can get really lost in the details. And especially if you have an engineering mind or something like that, I mean, it's a lot of fun to be able to create something custom specifically for you that no one else is using, and then go out there and kick everybody's butt with it. So any questions? I know there's like a whirlwind.
Someone tell me, please, this is being recorded.
Yeah, I'm recording it.
Great. Awesome, thank you.
And I'll post the video of it. I wish there was an easy, I mean, I'm sure that if you search on YouTube for iRacing setup help, somebody has compressed it down into like a 5-minute thing maybe. But it's hard. There's no, and that's the best thing about it, is there's no silver bullet. If you jump into the old 911R, or the GT3R, the 991, what the changes for this car and those cars, they're not compatible. If you jump into the Mercedes, which is a front engine rear wheel drive car, completely different idea or completely different concept in how you want to set that car up because the way it's structured. So that's one of the reasons why in the PCA, especially when we do our series races and stuff like that, we're cognizant that the amount of time that different people have to dedicate to a race every week is not linear. You know, some people are some are kids that are home from college and they got all the time in the world, and some are, you know, working stiffs like we are, and, you know, can't devote as much time. And so what would you rather people doing, practicing driving or working on setups? And so that's why it's a conscious effort to make the series racing, the big kind of important series racings and PCA, to be fixed setup. Everybody has the same car. It takes one of the variables out. But we're trying open setting again. See how you guys like it. Who knows? Maybe if you guys love it, and then that becomes a change we incorporate for season 11. But in the interim, this is a great opportunity to try your hand at it, practice it, see what you think, and please voice your opinion on it. Because if you don't say anything about it, let's say you hate it, but you don't say anything about it, then the steering committee doesn't know that you hate it, and therefore, you know, they may only be getting good feedback, and they may make a change that you're not wanting to change. So anyway, I digress a little bit, but if you have any questions on setups and stuff like that, feel free to send me a message. Send a lot of people here have a lot of knowledge on this kind of stuff, and it can help you out. The thing I would caution, it's really tempting, especially on setups, to be like, well, what is that guy using? You know, send me your setup, or, you know, it's got to be the setup. The setup is helping, but it is not the reason why somebody is 2-3 seconds faster. It just makes somebody more comfortable with the car, and somebody's setup in the car that makes them comfortable with it may not work for you. And so by just grabbing my setup, let's say, is not going to all of a sudden make you the same speed as I am. And it may make you slower because that's not your driving style. So I really caution going and getting other people's setups without knowing how they drive just because they're fast. So keep that in mind. And there's plenty of times where I've raced baseline setups and beaten a lot of really fast people on custom setups. And it's just because I'm more familiar with the platform and the car than they are. So it's all relative. All right. Any other questions?
So it has to do with Einstein's fear of relatives?
Yes, exactly, Leaf. If you have any setup questions, ask Leaf. He'll give you an answer. It may be wrong, but he'll give you an answer at least. Cool.
His go-to is add more rake.
Yeah. Leaf is the master of rake, so. All right, I'm gonna stop the stream. I will post this on our Discord, and you can always review it at a later time. So thanks for watching on this front, and I will see you out there on the track.